that chat pod, if you had more flexibility, what would you do? How would you take advantage of that? How would your life be better with more flexibility? So Noah's saying you travel more, exercise more. What are other people saying from that perspective? What would you do with more flexibility? Give everybody a moment to think about that. Volunteer more, great things to do from that perspective. Sleep, yes, I think we'd all benefit from that. Cook more at home, go back to school, would work less. People are more productive, working at home so they get the same stuff done in fewer hours. Move to Mexico and average and manage everything from the beach. I'm a little bit jealous of that one. Exercise more, volunteer more, relax more. You look at all these sorts of things if you had more flexibility. And a good one here, working from a different place gives you different flexibility, spending more time with kids. Now take those feelings that you've got and you just had when you were thinking about what your life would be like if you had more flexibility over work, and multiply that across all of the employees that work for your organization. And think about that. So if you had the chance to exercise more, volunteer more, spend more time with your kids, with your loved ones, go back to school, do other learning, all sorts of things like that. Imagine coming into a workplace with the joy. It might be a virtual workplace, to be fair, but imagine coming into that sort of environment where you've got this flexibility and the joy that those employees will have, and the excitement that they'll have, and the smiling faces that they'll have, and just the sense of lack of pressure and lack of drain and all of those bad things going away by having to be in an office and making that slog to work back and forth every time, where you have to sit at your desk and do what you're supposed to do at your desk the whole time. And then if you look at 5:30 or 6 o'clock at the end of the day, you've got this sense of being refreshed when you finally get to leave that environment that you might have been working in. But if you give employees this sort of flexibility, they can have that sense of joy that you're all feeling, thinking about where you could go and how you could work differently if you had that type of flexibility. So you can kind of tell in your gut, having flexibility would be a great thing to have. But does it actually help employers? So employees are better off with it, but are employers better off with it? And the answer to that is yes. But before I prove that to you, let me explain what we mean by radical flexibility. So we've got this idea that employees are changing where, when, and how much they work. And just to give you a little bit of benchmarking data, during COVID-19, 83% of organizations changed where people work, working from home, all sorts of other stuff like that. What we also found is that 62% of organizations really adopted new approaches to change when work was done, allowing employees to work different hours, weekends, different days, different shifts, whatever it might be. What we also saw is that 43% of companies experimented with how much work is done, letting employees work 80% of the time for 80% of the pay, other factors like that, but really changing how much work is done as well. And so this idea of radical flexibility is not just us as a company giving those opportunities to our employees, but giving our employees the autonomy to make those calls and decisions and approaches on their own. And here's why we think this is a great idea. Let me first tell you why candidates think this is a great idea. What we're seeing is that there's some companies that are, or candidates that are turning down offers because employers don't offer that flexibility. There's a real retention issues that are out there. And what we're finding is that there's some employees during the pandemic have moved away and are not planning on moving back, but still expect to have their job from there. And for those employees that have done that, what are you going to do? Are you going to fire them and hire people locally? But there's this real expectation from the labor market. Not only will employees benefit from it, but employees expect it to be there. And this is why we think this is a really good idea from the employer perspective. When you look at a typical organization where employees work in the office 9 to 5, 40 hours a week, what we find when you look at that, just over a third of those employees, as evaluated by their managers, are considered high performers. So this isn't just those employees saying I'm a high performer. We validated that against whether or not their manager gives them a high performance score. So real data from real managers as to whether or not those employees are high performing. And then we wanted to see what happens when you start to introduce different components around radical flexibility. If you give employees more choice over where to work, what we actually find is that those managers then give those employees a higher performance score. Employees that have that sort of choice and sometimes work from the office, sometimes work from home, actually perform at a higher level than those who don't. When you let employees choose which hours to work, they're even a little bit more high performing. You see about another 3% of high performers that are showing up. When you give employees the choice over how much to work and just say, hey, let's just get it done, however long it takes you to get done, gets done. If it's less time than that, that's great, but let's just get things done. You get even more high performance from that perspective. And you add all of that together, and what you find when you shift from giving employees the choice of working in an office, 9 to 5, 40 hours a week sort of idea, to giving them radical flexibility over where, when, and how much they work, you go from about a third of employees receiving high performance scores from their managers to more than half of employees receiving high performance scores from the managers. A massive increase in the amount of performance that we get from our employees. Employees are better off. Think about all those things you just wrote down in the chat pod. And employers are better off. We get more high performing employees. Now, this reality has all sorts of implications for those folks that are thinking about learning, which is the idea that we can have a learning approach where we get people together, where we're all doing it at the same time, where it's not off cycle, is less likely to occur. So with this disruption in terms of the flexibility that employees expect and should be delivered to them, because it makes them better off, it makes us as employers better off, we have to design learning strategies that work in a massively flexible environment where only some of our employees are there some of the time, where only some of our employees are online at the same time, where some of our employees have very different working approaches in terms of the number of hours, their working relationship with us, contract versus full-time, et cetera. So how do we design learning in a massively flexible environment where our employees are anywhere, working at any time, and working different amounts? That is a fun challenge to go after, because it blows up this idea that we can simply have on-the-job learning as the main choice and main mechanism for how our employees learn. That was probably already going away a little bit as we thought about a lot of those tasks that people used to rely on for on-the-job learning have started to become automated through technology. It started to go away because managers actually have more direct reports now than they've ever had before and spend less time managing those direct reports. And oh, by the way, in a highly flexible environment, they actually have dramatically less insight to what their employees are doing because they can't see them and observe them on an ongoing basis. And this layer of flexibility. So we have to reimagine our approach to learning for a modern environment. And the mistake that almost all HR executives are making as we're approaching this massive step change and living through this step change. And in fact, we're in the middle of the world's biggest pilot on changing work that has ever occurred in the history of society. The biggest mistake that companies are making right now is the approach that they're taking is to say, let's virtualize our old processes to make them work today. What you have to do instead is identify new processes, new approaches to learning that work in a highly virtual, highly flexible environment. Point in case, the way that we would think about collaboration before is we'd have a whiteboard and we'd ask people to go put sticky notes on that whiteboard and say, we're collaborating. Probably was never a great way to collaborate to begin with, but that's how we did it. And now we're saying, we're in a virtual environment. Let's have a virtual whiteboard with virtual sticky notes, and we'll have people put virtual sticky notes on a virtual whiteboard, and we are now collaborating. That's an example of virtualizing an existing process. We have to throw all of that out. We have to reimagine learning in a world that is highly virtual and highly flexible in order to deliver the results that we need for our employees. And the reason why we have so much confidence that this is the world that we're moving into is not only do we see it from the results that are out there, but what we also see is that there's a ton of companies that are implementing these sorts of approaches. So Twitter, Airbnb have basically said you can work anywhere at any point in time. Companies like Microsoft have adopted a 4-day work week. If you're working for the state government in Colorado, you've got a 4-day work week option in front of you as well. And this isn't 4 10-hour days. It's working 4 8-hour days, and you pick the hours that you work. And in each one of these situations, what we have seen is that employee performance and productivity, when given this radical degree of flexibility, has actually improved, not worsened, and employees are better off. By embracing this world of radical flexibility, employees win, employers win. Both groups are better off. Let me turn to the second idea here, this idea of a shared purpose. And going back to that, one of those first things I asked you to put in the chat pod there is building on the values, understanding why we're working. Lots of comments about this expectation that employees want to work for a place that has a shared purpose for them, that where our values are aligned, that we're working together to accomplish those sorts of things. And there are all sorts of things that are going on across the globe around these issues of what role should employers play in the societal and cultural debates of the day. Everything from issues around climate and the environment to Brexit to equal rights for women, and as you think about #MeToo, immigration debates, LGBTQ debates, all sorts of societal changes that are going on that are incredibly active, that are impacting all aspects of our lives. But organizations are often hesitant to take a stance. They kind of want to stay in their bubble, if you will. And the reason why that they're hesitant to take this stance is they're afraid to do something wrong. What's really, really hard about taking these stances is that almost by definition, every single one of them, there's 40% of your employees that care passionately about this. And there's 40% of employees who care passionately on the other side of it, and probably about 20% of employees that are largely indifferent. And so the feeling is, if you get involved in these sorts of things, that you're going to perhaps make some of your employees really happy, but perhaps you're going to anger some of your employees as well. So here's the question that I've got for you. Let's look at this from an employee perspective. And what I want you to put in the chat pod, what percent of your employees do you think want you as an employer to get involved in the societal debates of the day? Do you think it's 10% of employees want their employer to take a stance, to make a statement, to say something? Do you think it's 20% of your employees that want you to get involved? 30%, 40%? Well, what's your guess? What percent of your employees, when asked, say, should we get involved in the societal and cultural debates of the day? What's your guess? Kind of 20%, 30%, 25%, that sort of range. That's where most people are. Now, to be fair, I cheated a little bit by asking the question the way that I asked the question. I anchored you on a low number. I started by saying 10, 15, 20%, in kind of the way that I asked the question. Interesting, one person says we're diverse, so most of us. Let me show you the data that we actually collect. This blew my mind when I first saw it, and it's played out in a bunch of different ways that we collect data from this perspective. Because I was with you. I thought it'd be 30%, 35, 25, somewhere in that sort of range of employees who expect their employer to get involved in the societal cultural debates of the day. I was way off. I was way wrong in my guess on this one. 74% of employees expect their employer to get involved in the societal and cultural debates of the day, even if that issue has absolutely nothing to do with their business. Just think on that for a second. 3 out of 4 of your employees say, do something, get involved, CEO, make things happen. Take a point of view. Your employees expect your CEO and you as an employer to get involved. And there's a good question like, why? Why is that the case? I think part of it is just passions that have emerged as we're living in a more polarized society than we've seen before. I think that's one factor. There's other factors that are out there as well. One, what we've seen is that government has been slow to respond to the rate of change that we've seen on a lot of these issues. The speed at which government regulation occurs is slower than the speed at which society is changing, and that's a fundamental problem that we've got. They also see CEOs at other companies taking a stance. And if that CEO is doing it, why is my CEO not doing it? And one of the comments here in the chat body, which is they want to work for leaders that they believe in. They want their leader to stand for something, especially younger employees that are in the labor market. They're making career decisions about what company to work for based upon whether or not that CEO actually stands for something. And then I think the other reason, we spent the last couple of years really talking about building the values of our organization. And saying something and doing something and saying we're a values-driven organization, we're an ethical organization, whatever it might be. And so if we've been saying that, then a lot of our employees say, well, if that's what you've been saying we are, you should do something about this. Let me share with you some data about what's going on. Because the world that we're in is changing, and it's changing where the CEOs used to say, well, should we say something about this? That's where they were before. And the world that we're moving into is not a should we say something world. Your employees are demanding that you say something. We're moving into a we should do something world. And let me show you what's going on. So this is data that we've looked at that's really, really interesting to me. We have looked at the engagement levels of employees, and we're measuring a particular way, and different people measure engagement in different ways. And the number that we get to as we're engaging is about 40% of employees at organizations that do not get involved in the statements of the day, or the issues of the day. About 40% of those employees can be described as highly engaged. When companies make a statement about the issues of the day, what we find is that the engagement levels at those companies actually declines a little bit. I'm gonna let that hover for a second. We just said employees want us to get involved. When we do, we make a statement. And when we do, our engagement levels decline. Isn't that kind of weird when you think about it? Do something, do something, do something. Okay, I'm going to make a statement about social injustice. I'm going to make a statement about the environment. I'm going to make a statement about politics. And when I do, my employees are disengaged. What's going on with that? Two things that we see. First, and someone just mentioned it here, statement is an action and can be construed as empty words. Those employees that are passionate about that issue, when you make a statement and do nothing else, it seems really hollow. You've been telling me how much you care about this thing. You've been telling me how important this is. You've been telling me how we really believe in being a diverse and inclusive organization, and you make a statement and do nothing else. You've angered that 40% that cares passionate about that issue. The other end of the spectrum, the people that disagree on that issue, oh my gosh, they made a statement on this thing that I disagree with. What's wrong with that person? So when you just make a statement and do nothing else, you disappoint those who care about the issue, you anger those who are on the opposite side of that issue. So we're no longer in a world where we should just say something. We must do something now, because when we do, what we actually find is that those engagement levels increase dramatically. So when our organizations move from saying something to doing something, what we actually find is that employee engagement levels go up. And this is true of people that support the issue and people who are against that issue. Both of those 40% groups are better off if we do it the right way. Even those people that disagree with us on the statements and actions that we're making become more highly engaged if we do it the right way. And we've seen this play out in a variety of different ways. So we've seen Cliff Bar, the nutrition company, Unilever's done a lot of stuff here. Telstra's done a lot of stuff here. If you want to look at a company that's done this really well, take a look at Bank of America. Really smart and thoughtful ways that they've worked through the doing something question. This is not just the saying something, but the doing something that's made all the difference that's there. And here's what those companies that do this well do. They co-create the strategy. They don't just say this is a pet issue that the CEO cares about and wants to get involved with. They work with employees to make it happen. 2, they're completely transparent about what they're doing. They don't hide the ball. They don't slide it off on some sort of fund that people aren't aware about. They tell everybody, this is what we're doing. This is what we believe in. This is how we're spending money. This is how we're spending time. This is how we're spending our resources. And it's dynamic. It's not well, we wrote a check one time and we're done. They run it like a business initiative. They keep track of it. They adjust their funding. They increase it. They decrease it. They change their focus. They put different people in charge of it. They evolve it. They take action in a business-oriented way that is co-created with their employees, internally transparent and dynamic. And when you do, and this is the part that is the most fascinating for me, when you take these 3 steps, even for those employees who disagree with you on that societal, cultural, political issue of the day, if you work with them to create the initiative, if you're transparent with them about what you're doing, and if you keep them up to date and evolve and rethink and adjust the process, and you spend real resources, real budget, real money, real time on it, even those who disagree with you on that issue feel more engaged because they know why you're doing it and how you got to it. And that's what's really important here. To pull this idea together about building a shared purpose, we can no longer stick our heads in the sand and say, well, we're in the business of making money, not in the business of impacting society. As we think about what the Business Roundtable talked about a little bit ago, that our employees are now stakeholders, our communities are stakeholders, our supply chain is stakeholders, that has a really profound impact for what does that mean in terms of how we get involved in society. And our employees are demanding that we do it. And if we do it in a way that works with them to figure out what we're going to focus on, we're transparent about it, we're dynamic about it, our employees are better off, we're invested in the issues and concerns that they've got, and they're more engaged in that process. Employees win, employers win. So as we think about it from kind of a learning executive perspective, there's all sorts of things that we need to think about here in terms of understanding how do we learn what our employees care about? How do we teach them and educate them on ways to think differently about impacting society? It's not just building skill sets to do their tasks well. It is building their capabilities to have an impact on society. And how do we make that happen? Now, to be clear, I'm not advocating for one issue or another issue on this side of an issue or that side of an issue. What we find within the research is that different organizations can get to different conclusions as to where they want to advocate and to what side they want to advocate on. That is going to be a company decision, not a Gartner advice decision. But the Gartner advice is you have to get involved. And if you do it in this way, even those who disagree with you are better off from an employee perspective. So that's the second big idea around creating a shared purpose. I want to move to this third idea around how do we build deeper connections in terms of what's going on from that perspective. One of the major lessons that we've learned because of COVID is this idea that work and life have blurred. And I'd even go beyond saying that. We used to think about it as we had work and we had life, and marry the two shall know each other. That evolved and that changed. Then we started to think about, well, we have work and life, and we're going to balance them together. Then we said, well, we're going to have work and life that's going to integrate somehow with each other. That's all old thinking. The right way to think about this now is that those people that happen to work for us, remember what that CFO said, are human beings that have a life, and work is a component of life. Our job is not just to manage the employee experience anymore. Our job is to help our employees with their life experience, where the employee experience is a component of their life experience. And when we adopt the mindset first that we need to help them with their life, and if we help them with their life, we will help them with their work rather than treating them as separate and distinct concepts. Work is embedded in life, not a separate thing to balance or integrate. It is a component. And we need to think about the world that way in particular. So how do we do that? Well, this is what's happened, is that COVID blurred the boundaries that we are experiencing even further. We saw it inside our employees' homes, we saw their dogs, we saw their kids. It's just a matter of time before one of my kids runs by behind me and makes a face or does something silly. It's just the reality of the world that we're living in nowadays. But what we need to be thinking about is how do we support employees across their whole life from that perspective? And that requires different thinking than we've had before. And so here's what that thinking looks like. We used to think about improving their work. Now we want to help them improve their life. We also want to help them improve their families' lives. We want to help them improve their communities as well. And there's lots of companies that are doing all sorts of interesting things in this space. So companies like New Balance and BlackRock, they actually have given apps to their employees to let them track their sleep from that perspective. HP and MasterCard have created learning programs for the kids of their employees to help them learn through time. This is a place where learning executives, I think, have a huge opportunity to expand that reach to help the kids of their employees. And Novartis has done a really, really cool thing here. What Novartis has done is they have an internal learning platform that has all sorts of learning around different skill sets that you can build, different technology skills that you can create, how to learn this programming language or that programming language, how to learn how to read financial statements, whatever, you name it. It's all digital. And what they've done is say, we've got this learning platform, which is highly scalable. If you're an employee at Novartis, what you're able to do is actually have your family members access the learning platform within Novartis. So imagine if you work there and you've got a spouse who lost their job and is looking to upskill. You've got a child who's trying to develop new skills to make them more competitive in the workplace. If you're an employee at Novartis, you can actually open up the learning platform there to the families, to your family, to give them access to it. Think about how cool that is. That is an incredibly simple, highly scalable thing that almost every company I imagine on this call could do to dramatically change the relationship with your employees. Just imagine if you come into work tomorrow as an employee or log on in our new virtual world, and you get an email that says, hey, we've got all these great learning things that are skill building, not unique to Novartis, not proprietary, you can take those off, but the general skill building on how to learn how to use this computer program, how to use R or Python or whatever you might have, depending upon your organization. And you get that email that says, hey, now your family and loved ones can take advantage of this learning as well. If you're an employee and you get that note, what you think is, gosh, my employer wants to help my family be better. That's wonderful. By getting more deeply involved, you can make better outcomes occur. I'll give you another story about a company that we work with that has done a really interesting thing here with their learning space. As they've moved to a much more digital environment, what they've actually done is open up their corporate university, their in-person university, to the local schools in their communities to give those kids at those schools an opportunity to go to school in a different place where they can socially distance. So a huge question for the folks on this call is, what do we think about the learning spaces, the physical learning spaces that we've created? Can we partner with our communities to change the purpose of those learning spaces, to make them better learning spaces, to help our customers learn, to help the people in our communities learn, and so on? Those are opportunities that are out there if we start to say, how can we not just build the skill sets of our employee, but how can we build better lives for our employees and their families and communities? And when we build those deeper connections, we get great results. Here's an example of what we've seen within the data. If you take this traditional approach where you just focus on building the employee experience and keep there, those are the dark gray bars, to the yellow one, which is this more comprehensive approach where you appropriately get involved with your employees. They report that their financial well-being is better off, their mental health was better off, their physical health was better off, their sleep was better off. Think about that. By getting more deeply involved with your employees, their lives are better off and they're more productive. Because what we see with the data, when you engage in this deeper relationship, there's more high performers and those employees say better stuff about you on the labor market. It gives you better and privileged access to the labor market to hire the types of employees that you want to get. And just think about it. Think about that Novartis story. You're able to say, we can help you learn and develop, and we can help your loved one and family members learn and develop. That's a really amazing thing to be able to provide to your employees. But we have to be a little bit careful on this one, which is that employees have a different level of comfort with a degree of involvement. For some of the high return activities, by getting more involved with them with their sleep, but we also find is that's where some of the places where employees have the least comfort. And you see this continuum that's out there when you get involved in their families, lower return, more comfort. When you get involved in the communities, lowest return, but highest degree of comfort. So the advice that we've got here is that you need to move beyond simply helping employees with their work experience and build deeper connections with them. And when you do, you help them with their life experience. And remember, shift your mindset here. It's not about balancing or integrating work and life. It's your employees have a life. Those people that happen to work for us are human beings that happen to be our employees. How do you help them with their life in a way that makes sense for them and for you? And by building these deeper connections, your employees are better off and you as an employer are better off as well. So you just have to balance this, right? There is a huge opportunity in this space, balance that against the level of comfort that employees have, and we can get to much better outcomes from that perspective. So here's how we see the world changing, just to kind of pull us together. We've seen an enormous amount of disruption in 2020. By the time we get a couple years in from now, this is what almost every year is going to feel like, just along things that we have no idea what they're going to be. In order to build the resilience that we want in our organization, in order to improve the performance of our employees, in order to create more engaged employees that are able to thrive in this incredibly volatile environment that will be the future, we need to think about creating radical flexibility. Let employees work where, when, and how much they want to work, and give them the choice over doing that. We, that as an organization, have to build the systems and tools to support them in a world of radical flexibility. We have to identify the shared purpose that we've got with them. We can't simply say we're in the business of making money, so we're not going to get involved. They're demanding that we get involved, and when we co-create that strategy with them, when we're transparent with them, and when we dynamically evolve it, our employees are better off, and we as an employer are better off. We want to build deeper connections with them. We don't just want to help them with their work experience or their employee experience. We want to help them with their life experience, where their employee experience is a component of that. And when we do, our employees are better off, and we as employers are better off. So we believe that there's this old deal that we've been working on that was really this tension between I give you my labor, you give me your money, was the relationship, to dramatically oversimplify it. And we want to move to this new deal, this deal that's based around radical flexibility, creating a shared purpose, building deeper connections. And when we do that, we as employees win, and we as employers win. We're both better off. So I know we're right at the top of the hour here, so hopefully that gives you a sense of how we're seeing the world change, and hopefully provides a little bit of inspiration about what we can do as organizations, as HR leaders and HR executives, to really help move us to this new place that's a more humane place. And just think back to that CFO that I was mentioning. It really captures this radical notion, this radical idea that the people that happen to work for us are people, not just workers. And when we take that approach with everything we do, our employees are better off, and we as employers are better off as well.
Well, that was a great conversation for sure, Brian. And we appreciate you giving us some of those thoughts to think about. Looking here at the Q&A box, and I think that because we've got our after party going on, I think what we're going to do is move most of the questions over to the live after party. But I really liked a couple of things that you pointed out and provoked thought on. The first was that whole humanized approach thing. I think that's a mindset shift that a lot of organizations are having to entertain at this point in time. And, the three takeaways I got were the big three things you focused on, which was radical flexibility, shared purpose, and deeper connections. My one question for you is the information that you gave Would you be able to share a link to some of those reports and data that you shared?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, perfect, perfect. Because that was some really interesting information and data. And you know, as a marketing person, I have certainly always advised clients to be somewhat neutral. But you know, you obviously provided a lot of good data to think about too.
Good. Well,
Um,
hopefully gave people some ideas and some things to.
yeah, yeah, and we've got a global audience here, so it was interesting to see some of the feedback from across the world, actually.
Yeah, that's great.
Um, So thanks again for joining us, and we're going to give folks the link now for the live after party where you can go talk with Brian directly in the after party. You will have to hop off of this Zoom link in order to do that because Zoom only allows you to be on one Zoom at a time. Not all roles, that's theirs. But the after party link is shown on your screen. There is no password required. You just enter the ID information. You can meet Brian over there, ask all the questions you have, and Brian would be happy to answer those. So go check out the after party